I just want to say to everybody, thank you so much, Dave, for the wonderful welcome to country. I'm very grateful for that. I'm not with you today because I have COVID-19 and I'm in isolation, so I'm terribly, terribly disappointed. And I want to add to the welcome to everybody who is in the room and online for attending our roundtable. Our team is responsible for the project Improving Indigenous Research Capabilities and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Research Data Commons. So our project, representing researchers, organisations and communities across Australia, will review and refine national and international frameworks of Indigenous data governance and Indigenous data sovereignty to strengthen the foundations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander data governance principles and translate and apply them to Indigenous research data tools and infrastructure. We're aiming to deliver an Indigenous research capability program that celebrates, supports and enhances the capabilities of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers at the interface of research data science and Indigenous knowledge systems. We are working with communities and their organisations to determine their engagement with and aspirations for their data. And the program will be delivered by these three parallel streams of activities: development of social architecture for Indigenous data governance and sovereignty, development of technical architecture, building the foundations for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research data commons, and three, core national Indigenous data assets, building an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander socio-temporal framework. These three streams will lay the foundations for building national Indigenous research capabilities, framed by a set of agreed Indigenous data governance principles to leverage existing data assets, linking them with new and existing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander data sets. And the project will generate a detailed account of research data ecosystems, including how research data is distributed and used for the benefit of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The core aim is to develop Indigenous research data capabilities by supporting and strengthening social and technical research data architecture, bringing together key national stakeholders to collectively agree on a core set of Indigenous data governance principles with appropriate tools and analytical methods. We seek to ensure the cultural and ethical safety of the data and the individuals and communities from which the data comes, and the project will leverage the Australian Research Data Commons capabilities, supporting institutions to share data more freely and cooperatively following the FAIR and CARE data principles: findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. And the CARE data principles: collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility and ethics. Our outputs are expected to be Indigenous data governance principles agreed on by experts and our own communities, the application of those principles, improved understandings of Indigenous research communities across Australia and Indigenous research data across Australia, the development of an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research data catalogue, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander data rematriation prototyping, and the technical architecture will be based on a catalogue of data assets using DCAT2, the international standard for interoperability between data catalogues published on the web. We have a wonderful network of researchers, many of whom are with us today. I won't read out everybody on the list, but thanks to all for joining us and committing and contributing to this most important project. We also have partners across the university sector and our community sector. So I want to give a big call out to all of our partners from universities, communities, and of course those people from the CSIRO as well. We're funded by the Australian Research Data Commons, and you can read more about the project on the website of the Australian Research Data Commons. So welcome to the Roundtable again on Naarm in Wurundjeri country, and many thanks to Dave for a very warm welcome to country. My apologies, I can't be there. And once again, on behalf of everyone, I pay our respects to the traditional owners and to the elders. I hope you enjoy the Roundtable. Thank you.
So thanks very much, Marcia. I think everyone in the room here and probably online are quite sad that you couldn't make it in today, and we hope you're feeling a little bit better than you have been, and we're really, really glad that you can still Zoom in. So thank you very much, Marcia. We got the PowerPoint? Excellent. So just briefly, my name's Kristen Smith. I'm a Senior Research Fellow in the Indigenous Studies Unit. I'm also the Research Director of the Indigenous Data Network and the Indigenous Studies Unit in the Centre for Health Equity in the Melbourne School of Global and Population Health.
Hi, I'm Dr. Vanessa Russ. I'm a Senior Lecturer at the University of Melbourne in the School of the Faculty of Arts. I'm also a Nurunyan girl from the Kimberley.
Nara, I'll reintroduce myself. So my name is Levi. I'm a Waka Waka and Cubby Cubby man. So I'm originally from the southeast region of Queensland. I joined both Vanessa and also Professor Marcia and Dr. Kristen in that team, and I'm the Strategic Manager of Indigenous Data.
So we thought we'd just give a very quick background about the Indigenous Data Network itself and talk a little bit about the aims of the day, some of the issues that we'd like to discuss and get some conversation going with amongst everyone in the room and also joining us from Zoom. So very briefly, the Indigenous Data Network was founded back in 2018, really as a result of the Indigenous Data Sovereignty Symposium we held in 2017 at the University of Melbourne, which was co-convened by also ANU and IATSIS. So as a result of that, there really was a call for a network to come together to provide some sort of a collective base from which to support and drive better data outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So the Indigenous Data Network aims to support community-controlled organisations to collect, manage and utilise data assets relevant to their needs and aspirations and promote Indigenous data empowerment. So that's some of our core aims and goals in the IDN. We have a couple of projects going on, as we've already mentioned. This roundtable actually forms part of the larger ARDC project that Marcia has just been speaking about.
So key issues, I mean, we couldn't fit them all on this actual page, so this is very broad, of course. So key issues for the Indigenous Data Governance and Sovereignty Roundtable. Indigenous research data exists in a wide variety of formats, and a lot of you know this already, in a wide variety of contexts, but these assets are scattered and inadequately catalogued. There are many unidentified yet highly significant Indigenous data assets located across the nation, many of which are orphaned, held within 5 broad communities of Indigenous research data custodians, and again this is just for our purposes here, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and organisations, universities, researchers and other research organisations, the GLAM sector, so galleries, libraries, archives, museums, all of, I think, who we have represented on this, Commonwealth, state, territory and local governments and the private sector, including not-for-profit, so it's really broad, right? These custodians are largely siloed, both within and between communities, and have widely varying data science practices and capabilities. As there is very little knowledge or understanding of what data exists or is held by these Indigenous research data custodians, issues of preservation, conservation, registration and reuse loom large. The low levels of general data literacy and knowledge of its potential benefit impacts on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities across the nation. So you can sort of see how broad this is.
So I guess the questions are, how do we embed, support and sustain Indigenous data governance across Australian data infrastructure? How might individuals, organisations and governments use best practice models to ensure that good governance, and what incentives might assist the preservation and the use of data into the future? What types of authentication practices and processes embedded in IT infrastructure could appropriately protect data on behalf of individuals and communities? What are practical ways to apply the fair and care principles? Are there missing pieces to the puzzle that need further examination? How might we legislate and regulate data governance to benefit Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander data within the jurisdictions across Australia? And how can Indigenous data sets be improved by embedding Indigenous knowledges in new and innovative ways?
So we really understand that there's a lot of people with varied expertise and experience in the room, and we encourage everyone to discuss and think about these questions as we go through the roundtable. And not expecting that we're going to come to any specific answers today, but these are the sorts of things that we want to bring up, and the presentations, I guess, will show you some more of the elements that aren't listed in that slide. So, as we mentioned before, the key aim of this roundtable really is to bring together the data custodians from those 5 sectors. So most of us here have either collect data or have access to data or a whole range of interactions with data. So we wanted to provide a forum for our attendees to collaboratively explore and discuss practical solutions, key barriers and models of governance for shared benefit for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the nation. We also want to make sure one of the other aims is that we get to share and discuss international best practice data science, data governance and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges and worldviews, which across the 2 days you'll see coming through in the presentations, and hopefully everyone here in the room and on Zoom will share their experiences and their knowledge and their expertise. Also, we want to think about providing a bridge between Indigenous research data owners or custodians and Indigenous research data users and service providers.
And just for our group, finally, we want to recognise and acknowledge the extraordinary number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples represented both in the room today and joining us virtually across Australia for this roundtable, from community-controlled organisations, academia, business and government agencies, and I think even on personal levels. We want to thank everyone who has joined us today, taking the time to contribute to this complex yet vital and unresolved matters that we will be exploring in more detail across the next 2 days. And we note that this is a roundtable seeks to continue the discussion first raised in our 2017 symposium, recognising the scholarship that's already been undertaken, and to think through practical strategies to design tools and resources that enable the practical application of Indigenous data governance principles to data past, present and future across all sectors. So we really thank you for coming today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present in this forum. Data and data governance is only as good as how well we understand the community we serve. And Uncle Dave states it so well when he says data and knowledge. You know, we really want to ensure that we care for country. This presentation is a synthesis of my work to support marginalised and vulnerable communities in health over an 11-year period. And so really, what are the learnings and lessons around data sharing and governance from other areas is really important to share in this forum, both at a national and international level. I also want to, I guess, bring in the elements of e-research here at QUT and the appropriate institutional management of research data, both digital and non-digital. And I guess working with thought leaders in data science here at QUT and elsewhere. And I guess all this culminates in our partnering with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Community Health Service here in Brisbane and Logan, the largest health service in Queensland. And really, we worked together last year to develop the data strategy roadmap for them, to give them agency with their data challenges. Certainly a highlight of my career, and I get an opportunity to share that and these experiences with this audience. So thank you so much. Okay, so first of all, QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nation owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise that their lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning, and QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. So, health, rare diseases, and you may think, well, small numbers, only 2 million Australians living with one of 7,000 rare diseases: motor neuron disease, cystic fibrosis, one of 7 forms of multiple dystrophies. And if they're rare, why should we care about them? Shouldn't I focus more on common issues? Well, 35% of all deaths in the first year impacted by rare diseases, 8 years for diagnosis, as I said, 7,000 rare diseases, 2 to 3 diagnoses along the journey, 200 million people impacted across the Asia-Pacific region. If you look at APEC, along the Pacific Ocean and Pacific Rim, you'll see the countries with multiple governments in different forms, many different languages, all coming together, and 95% of these rare diseases have no treatment. So rare diseases, and this is what we've put together, exposes gaps in the larger health system. And there are, here in Australia, a number of rare diseases specifically around Indigenous communities, Machado-Joseph disease, and Kristen mentioned to me recently a virus that's of impact to the Indigenous communities. And our remit has always been, if we solve the challenges for rare diseases, we can solve the broader problems in an economy's health system. And it's no coincidence then that myself and my colleague are developing the data governance framework for Queensland Health. So rare diseases is the journey we started, but we are now developing the data governance framework for Queensland Health. So just to really just summarise and finish off the APEC action plan on rare diseases, 70 recommendations, and it really is to facilitate, and we heard it today in the opening comment, greater alignment of policies and regulations across jurisdictions, supporting that urgent implementation of proven best practices here in Australia, internationally, and really that promoting of multi-sectoral collaborations and partnerships with patients. And we have multiple language translations. And here are the pillars for rare diseases. So yes, we talk about data and data governance, but you really need to understand the community. And that's what Uncle Dave mentioned. And that's what Marcia and Kristen and Levi and Rebecca have highlighted. We really need to understand the breadth of the different themes. And I'm not going to go into any detail here, but really when we start thinking about Pillar 9, managing, pooling and usage of patient data securely and effectively, you have to think about the whole dimensions around training, skills, research and development, awareness, information and knowledge and capture, both medical and non-medical. So what is data governance from our learnings? Where if we think from a health perspective, so you can see where I'm coming from, aligning the care to the expectations of individuals and their families. And so you can't have data governance as an afterthought. And so we really want to think about from a perspective of responsibility, protecting and safety of patients, data and systems, accountability. All staff and students are clear about the objectives, their roles and responsibilities. Transparency, so we think about that monitoring to ensure compliance. Achievability, you can't have governance that's just not able to be implemented effectively and meaningfully, and then hence purposeful. So it's got to be accessible to doctors and patients. And so if we think about those broad principles, we really want to think about having a consistent approach, which then builds credibility. And from credibility, you can then build trust. So patient-doctor partnerships, we really want to bring that together. Protecting patient information, and you can just leave out the word patient as you sort of reflect on the slides that I'm presenting here. Health professionals adequately trained. fit for purpose data for analytics and clinical trials and other observational studies, and it's got to be useful. So really, when we think about data governance over the 11-year journey that I've been involved in this space, that we are transitioning from this policing mindset to a joint venture. And so you have engagement, enhanced engagement and trust with the key stakeholders, the clients and the service providers, that people who get access to data do so carefully. So that literacy, which David Lovell will present straight after here, after my talk. And then, of course, who can get access to that data and the limits of that use, as Uncle Dave has mentioned. And then, of course, this is the other potential disrespectful dimension. If you have access to the data, there's a risk of not using it effectively. And that just really provides a disservice to the thousands of years of knowledge that's been acquired in an Indigenous context. So we need to have those standardised policies and procedures. Secure, it's got to be for patients, researchers, government, organisational, and the frameworks that guide operations that remove redundancy, but not completely. I think it's important to have some healthy redundancy in the system. And then so all of that context then brings us into the work that we did with the ATSIX Brisbane Health Service, and Raymond and Jared and Jonathan, I believe will be talking straight after this presentation. And what did ATSIX wanted to do? And hopefully you can start to see the overlaps with what I've just presented from a data governance perspective in a health context to the sort of remit from a health service for ATSIX. So to undertake ongoing evaluation of its operations to ensure they are safe, effective and efficient. So that's the operations side. Report its outcomes to demonstrate compliance with funders and regulators and promote community trust. Identify opportunities for novel service development, and that's the innovation piece. Engage in co-design processes to implement and evaluate these using real-world evidence. Benchmark its operations with equivalent services and participate in research aimed at enhancing the welfare of the community. And so when we sort of started this, and I present again tomorrow about the roadmap that we did develop, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of an insight, only a couple more slides left. Where is the data and how is it analysed? If we think from a patient-centric electronic health record dimension from a health service, to benchmarking and reporting, that's broader than health, operational business data, the census analytics data that ATSIX will undertake its own census, and it's not an ageing population, it's that 0 to 25, and that intelligent decision support. So there are silos, and we've heard that already. Kristen sort of mentioned it. So ATSIX developed an amazing roadmap for IT. And I won't go into that detail, but certainly when we think about, well, what does that mean? Well, we can get data linkage. That's fantastic. And so I guess I refer to this as retrospective data linkage. The system's already there, they're siloed, and we need to connect them. What's the strategy roadmap? Well, stay tuned for the talk tomorrow, but just 2 more slides. So what are the issues, just in summary? So we want to make use of data that must expand beyond health data mindset and encompass social services and core business activities. So it's really not just about the health, it is about poverty, a roof, housing, domestic violence, and a range of different dimensions there. Ensuring that the clients and their families are at the centre of the service. So you can sort of start to see, when we talk about rare diseases, you leave no one behind. It's the same sort of dimension in Indigenous context here, really important. Effective partnerships and maintaining it. So there's that sustainability dimension, really important. It's no use building a system that's not going to be here for the next 2, 5, 10, 50, 100 years. We need to be really thinking quite broad in this perspective, moving beyond compliance and mandatory reporting and enable strategic priorities. And then just really finally then, we want to establish this culture of research that inspires. It's not just research or operations or service enhancement, that continuous improvement. They're one and the same. We really want to think about how we embed our activities, the innovative approaches, into routine business as usual. Implement digital approaches, and as Raymond has highlighted, are we collecting the right data, and are we asking the right questions? These are fundamental dimensions. Data is not just the asset, it's the questions that we ask of that data. And then the other dimensions is research data management. So if we talk about external stakeholders and groups and shareholders, what about getting our institutions and our house in order? So there's an appropriate management of data, and it's cultural works and artifacts. Some of it's based in museums, geographically inaccessible areas in Australia. What can we do to help and support that? And certainly I'm involved in the Australian Research Data Commons institutional underpinnings that has, I think, 25 universities working together, because research data management planning is where it all starts, and it's not, I guess, as well understood within an institution. So, because ultimately researchers across institutions want to share their findings as seamlessly as possible. So I'll stop there, and I'm going to pass it over to David Lovell.
Thank you, Matt, for that. That's a nice lead up to what I'm going to present now. And look, I really thank the organisers for inviting me to present at this roundtable. I'm very honoured to take part. My name is David Lovell, and I'm a professor in QUT School of Computer Science and QUT Centre for Data Science. Big thanks to Uncle Dave Wandin for his welcome to country. I really appreciated the intent and the meaning behind it. What a great way to start. And before I start properly, I'd like first to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yuggera as the traditional owners of the land where QUT now stands and on which I'm now standing. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of all the lands that we're standing on today. Now, full disclosure, I'm an electrical engineer by training, and I've been working with data for over 3 decades, including at CSIRO and now at QUT. I have limited experience in working on issues that are especially relevant to First Nations people, but I'm keen to listen and learn and contribute what I can. And what I wanted to contribute right now is to address this question. How can we make data literacy mean something useful? And my aim in this presentation is to share some of the insights I've gained in presenting data literacy fundamentals. Data literacy is one of those terms that get bandied around a lot, but when you dig deeper, people are often not that sure exactly what it means. I think it's also, for many folks, a boring phrase. Not for me, I love data literacy, but you know, for many people, it's maybe not pulse quickening, possibly because data and literacy are quite abstract terms that can be hard to relate to one's own life. And I was confronted by this when I was asked to present to staff from Services Australia on the fundamentals of data literacy. So I think making data literacy mean something useful is really important if we want to motivate people to become more data literate. People have to see and understand how data literacy can translate into their lives, to be interested in learning more and to get the benefits of being data literate. So with that in mind, and to help get a good discussion going, I wanted to share with you some of the definitions of data literacy that's out there, to share the definition that I pitched to Services Australia, and afterwards to listen and learn from your thoughts and reactions on this. So, as I said, data literacy is a term we hear a lot these days, but it's one that's hard to pin down. And, you know, given the huge buzz around data, it's pretty safe to say that the big consulting groups have a view. And so that's where I started in my presentation to Services Australia. So here's what the Gartner Group have to say about data literacy. The ability to read, write, and communicate data in context, including an understanding of data sources and constructs, analytical methods and techniques applied, and the ability to describe the use case, application, and resulting value. It's a bit of a mouthful. Let's take a look at what Wikipedia says as another great source. The ability to read, understand, create, and communicate data as information. I think that's bringing information into it and useful. There's some other text here about literacy as a general concept and so forth. But to be honest, for me, these definitions are missing something. I want to live in a world where people are doing more than just reading and understanding and communicating data, which is why I quite like the definition from Catherine D'Ignazio and Rahul Bhargava, who describe data literacy in terms of working with data, analysing data, and arguing with data. I think the ability to argue with data is super important, but these two authors actually mean it in the sense of using data to make an argument. I actually mean having an argument with the data. I think we need to be able to challenge the data, to question its meaning, its origin, its interpretation, its validity, and its use. I think to be data literate, we really have to be able to use our critical thinking to make sure we understand what the data does and does not mean. And so this definition has been adopted by the Data Literacy Project, who've also added a really important stipulation that these abilities should apply regardless of your role, skill level, or the tools that you use. So thinking on all those good ingredients, here's a definition that I thought fitted better with Services Australia's mission. It said, data literacy is the ability to read, work with, analyse, and argue with data, regardless of your role, skill level, or the data analysis tools you use. And to deliver benefits from our data literacy skills, we must also develop a broader understanding and appreciation of data ethics. And we can think of data literacy as dealing with what we could do with data, and data ethics as being what we should do with data. Now, the other important ingredient in this pitch to Services Australia was to emphasise the responsibility of organisations so that we can all reap the benefits of data literacy. So I stress that our organisations play a vital role in data literacy by creating an environment and a culture where it's safe to speak up, ask questions, and seek explanations, even when the right answer seems obvious to everybody else. You can have the most data literate people around you in your workplace, in your organisation, in your community. But if they don't feel safe to speak up and ask questions, I don't think anyone's going to get much benefit from data. We'll all just be pushing numbers around like little robots. So that's how I kicked off my presentations to Services Australia in November last year. And I've been asked to give that presentation again in a few weeks. And the feedback that I got from the audience suggested that for that particular audience, this definition resonated pretty well. And so what my hope is that this could be useful input into today's roundtable with a different audience in mind. I'm really convinced that we need to make data literacy mean something useful to people, and I'm really interested to know what you think of the ideas I described here and how they could be made more useful and more relevant to those who have a stake in Indigenous data. Thanks very much.
So this is for session 1, the introduction and key issues, from Robin Burgess at the ARDC, who's asked, you mentioned a wide range of formats and contexts for the data. Could you provide some examples?
Passing it to me. I think we did want to actually share some examples of different data, and then we kind of got caught up in like, how do you actually create them so that they're not targeting anyone's data in particular. So I think thinking of the range would be something from museum data. As we know, there is a lot of data being produced in museums or being carried by, or where people who've been researching collections have collected data and perhaps have stored it in different ways. And museums are getting better at this stuff, but they're not quite there yet. We can think of in terms of university data creation, we could think of a series of anthropologists that have collected data over the years and perhaps haven't stored it anywhere because they don't know where to put it. And So I guess that brings us into that idea that this conversation in terms of how the ARDC project is running is quite greenfields orientated. I've been saying this a lot. I nicked it off Nick Carr because we don't really know. We know that there's lots of data, right? We know people have it in their own storage systems, in their own computers. We don't know where it's going to go. We also know there's orphan data everywhere as well, and I think Marcia could probably talk to some of that orphan data. So we are starting from scratch in some ways, and we're also taking what's already there. So, you know, what do universities know about their data? And I think ANU are doing some scoping around what Indigenous data exists across its whole university, and where is it held, and who knows it exists. And I think the other part to that in terms of context is that one of the key things I keep coming across in my research around this particular project are the management gaps. You know, someone might be in IT, knows where all these little pockets of data are, knows the code, has the security pass, and then they're like, I'm leaving this university, going somewhere else. And suddenly those security passes are gone, or the storage system changes and it upgrades and they don't take all the data with them. And so we've got these pots of data sitting around where we have to just be lucky that someone can actually hack in to get access to them. So there are all these sort of risks and challenges which I think we're all keen to take up. So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. We've got any more Q&A questions from online?
No.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, we move to the next part of the agenda, which is the roundtable discussions. So we're going to have facilitators walk around and assist with groupings and facilitating the discussion and some topics to think about. So I'd like to thank Professor Matt Bellegarde again and Professor David Lovell for their presentations from QUT. We commence with the roundtable discussion.
So just to clarify, we're really wanting to stimulate some discussion about what you've just heard spoken about in the last two presentations, to think about some of the core issues that we really need to discuss today and tomorrow, some of the things that are coming up. What would you like the project, the ARDC project, to be looking at? What would you like the researchers on there to be focusing on? What are the gaps? So if anyone has got any initial comments or questions around that, we'd really encourage you to speak up now.
Hello. It's Raymond Brunk here from AIGS Brisbane. I just want to say thank you to Matt and David. I do have a question for David and probably also a stimulation for the rest of the audience. When David spoke about data literacy and the definition around argument, it really reminded me of my early teaching days. And within teaching, you know, so often you teach children to read, and there's 3 different layers of reading. And you know, so many times kids would be able to, you know, read a passage of text, but they wouldn't be able to comprehend it. You know, you'd ask them what does it mean in terms of that passage of text, and they just look at you blankly. But yet the third level really isn't just about comprehension; it's about critical literacies. So that's the ability to critique what you're reading. And given the fact that the IDN network and one of the beneficiaries around this piece of work that we're doing collectively is data and how it's owned by Aboriginal communities, it'd be really interesting to just have in the forefront of our minds around how we actually building data literacy in the argument sense or in the critique sense that we own, and where does that role take place? Is it, you know, not just within a university environment but also within schools or within community as well? So I just want to also say thank you to David. That was really stimulating around the argument definition.
It's David here. Could I respond briefly?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, good. Sorry. It's always hard to know when to speak and when not to speak when you're doing these things in different rooms. But yeah, look, Raymond, to tell you the truth, thinking about that meaning from the data was raised to the forefront in one of the conversations that we were having with in our current work with ATSIX, where someone mentioned that people at a particular community might be providing data and not having a good idea about how it was going to be used, or not sort of understanding the way in which people would sort of share and interpret that, and how that data might make a difference to their lives. So that's why I think, data literacy, it's got to be something where people can, as you say, get to that third level of meaning and ask the question and say, hey, hang on, where's this going to? What's happening with this? How is it important to my life and the life of others? So, I reckon it would be really helpful if in this initiative, there could be a good understanding that encourages that kind of questioning with data literacy. But I'm super curious to know other people's reactions to that idea about engaging with and arguing with the data. Do you think that's a good and relevant thing in this context? I'm keen to know.
My turn. G'day everyone, I'm Nick here. I won't introduce myself fully because I'm talking later on, so I don't want to go through all that. But I've got a little extension to this discussion about understanding of data and so on. So that you might have people who within the Indigenous community understand data better than some other people. So that's a kind of a responsibility that they've taken on or they've been given. But part of the job that was mentioned at the beginning of this this discussion today, and that we all know is in front of us, is about governing and managing data even when you don't understand it. So there's Indigenous data out there, or data that's been collected about Indigenous people. It shouldn't be the case that Indigenous people have to fully comprehend every bit of that data to have some opinion about how it can and should be used. How it can and should be used is it's a role that is not about understanding the data, it's about the ethics of its use. So I'd like to put to you all to think about, to tell us what roles you think Indigenous people could and should have with regards to their data. And I'm not talking about general roles, I'm talking about very specific roles, because I'm at the technical end of things and I've got to implement stuff. And the stuff I've got to implement is I've got to be able to write notes about, for this piece of data, what Indigenous people have roles with respect to it. So maybe there's a role there for someone who is an Indigenous person to best understand that data and best argue with it. That might be a role. Another role might be, well, there's an Indigenous person there, they don't really necessarily have to understand it, but what they do have to understand is how it could or should be used by people. There might be someone there who has to understand whether that data represents Indigenous people well or not. That sort of thing. So these are not just about data understanding, it's about all of the roles that Indigenous people may play with respect to data. So for instance, if you think about traditional in the data world, non-Indigenous roles with respect to data, you've got roles like custodians, you've got roles like stakeholders, you've got roles like, yes, people who created data, people who use it, people who funded the collection of data. They don't necessarily have to understand the data at some deep level, but they're prepared to put money in to get data collected. So with those kind of roles in mind, which I'll go through again a bit later on, I'd encourage you all now, later, tomorrow, to think about the roles that you know are relevant to Indigenous communities, or if you're Indigenous yourself, what roles you think should or could be represented, and then to tell us, the tech people, what those roles are, what you want them to do, so that we can actually implement systems that actually know about those roles and do something with them.
Yeah, sure. I'll share one practical example. So there's a data set collected through the ANU called the MK study, and I chair the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Data Governance Committee for that data set. So everyone that's on that data committee is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. So we decide who gets to use that data and how they're going to use it. And so there's a set of principles, Indigenous data sovereignty principles, that we've operationalised, and for people to be able to access that data, we have sort of like a checklist, and we have to make sure that every one of those principles are being adhered to for that particular data set. So that's one method that so far that's been quite effective, I think. is something for you to consider and for others to consider here today.
Let's have Len down here.
Okay, we on? Yeah, look, I just wanted to say how much I agree with what David was saying about arguing with the data, and particularly in the context he was talking about where he was talking to people from Services Australia, because Services Australia was responsible for the greatest abuse of data in modern Australian history with their overhead scheme. So yeah, we've got to argue with data all the time.
I'm Fiona Stanley from, and I'm really coming from a health and wellbeing data sets and record linkage and all of those sorts of things. So I'm limited in that. I realise there's a breadth of data, but there are two issues that I think the ethics issues are really, really important for us to think about, and the load that it puts on Aboriginal ethics groups to do all the things that you talked about, Nick, and that you talked about at ANU, and that it's that capacity and that ability, and I think when you have those kind of elders and other people on ethics committees, it adds a huge amount to the richness of it all. But you know, that's one issue of how you're going to actually have appropriate ethics committees for all the things that you want to do, arguing or not with the data. The second point I just wanted to make is about the identification of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in data sets, many of which have not been collected by Aboriginal Medical Services, or they've been collected by Services Australia, or they've been collected by universities or institutes like ours. And this came about particularly because of the elders on Rhonda Marriott's advisory group, who quizzed me about international ways of identifying Aboriginal people in data sets. And they said, well, what happens, you know, because we have midwives data where we record all births, and that actually has got status on it, Aboriginal identification on it. How it's collected, though, is sometimes, you know, not fantastic. It's better probably now. The other thing is that they were worried about Aboriginal children born to non-Aboriginal mothers and all of those kind of relationships. So it raises lots of issues about, I guess, the quality of the data, which actually hasn't been raised a lot, but that is incredibly important as well. But identification in all the different data sets that particularly relate to individuals, or data being linked across jurisdictions, or you know, health and wellbeing, for example, across those sort of things.
Yeah, look, what about closing the gap and government data? Closing the gap is a myth, and Aboriginal people are caught up in this. What do I?
You might close it, is it?
Hello? Aboriginal people are caught up in this system where data is being given on their behalf from government, and it's a lie. The idea of closing the gap is a myth, and this relates to what you just said about white women having babies from Aboriginal people, and or Aboriginal people having babies from other Aborigines, depending on what colour you are. So all these sort of contradictions, if you like, are buried in this idea of data. And I'd like to spend a couple of hours telling you about the problems of this, where I would start. Tell me where I would start.
Thank you. I want to pick up exactly on that point about government administrative data. My name's Peter McGillivray from UNSW, and I'm here with the Mayamnari Wangara group today. I guess the big question in my mind is the data literacy within government. There's a lot of discussion of communities' understanding of data, and I feel like there's quite sophisticated understandings there already, but when we've tried to gain access to government data. One of the biggest challenges we face is data literacy, with government being custodian of its own data. So I feel like that's something which would be great to kind of find a thread for the next 2 days' discussions, and I suppose who's managing those relationships with government to bring them along with the huge advancements I feel like we've already made in this area.
G'day, I'm Sam Provost from ANU First Nations Portfolio, and I'm here with my Ngari Wingara as well. I just think it's probably a good time to have a discussion around what is Indigenous data, because I don't think we've really gotten there yet. And Vanessa was talking about the breadth of data available currently, and I think if we're keeping it in our mind over the next few days, really think about what these data can be. And just for example, Stephanie Carroll et al. 2019 defines Indigenous data as any facts, knowledge or information about native nations and its tribal citizens, lands, resources, cultures and communities, information ranging from demographic profiles to educational attainment rates, maps of sacred lands, songs and social media activities. So I think just to hold in our minds the breadth of Indigenous data, and it's not, I think often in this space we're talking about health data, which obviously is really important. I come from a sort of a natural resource management space, and for me kind of spatial and water data is just as important to community as well. And coming back to that beautiful welcome this morning too, centering it in land and looking after land, and really knowing that biophysical data also is really important and can be considered under this umbrella of Indigenous data more broadly. So just holding that in our minds as we have this conversation.
Hi, I'm Louise. Is that on? Yep. Louise Lyons from SAMRI. I'm just going to be a little bit contentious and say I just don't like the term data literacy, similar to the term health literacy and how it's often applied in a negative context to Aboriginal people. And I think really we know our data. What we want to talk about is how that data is protected and used. So I think what I'd like to see over the next couple of days is perhaps another term for describing what's probably more of a Western construct of data literacy, and more about the opportunity for two-way learning in that process. So I'd written down, sorry, you probably can't hear me through my mask, something like information sharing and collective interpretation and interrogation and application of information. So something a little bit broader that includes our knowledge systems in a way that doesn't have a negative construct around it. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just going to point to the online crowd. We've already got some really great questions already in the Google Doc. Can I invite, I think it's David, to actually ask your question online if you're still there, David. We'll try and do that. Can we also ask you just, if you're online, to put your hand up so that we can see that it's you? We're going to try and capture these in lots of different ways, but we don't want to lose our online crowd. So if I could get David to just pop up and...
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, the question I asked in writing is quite similar to what Fiona Stanley was referring to, and that is to try and understand how people regard data where there's a mix of sources and records, some of which are from Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, some of which are from other people. So community health records is great. So if you've got like a community health record, you might have some pieces of information which are contributed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and pieces of information which come from others. It's not clear to me how would be a good way to consider that mixture.
Well, I could make a proposition that Aboriginal people identity when this prospect of what did I say? Database. The database on closing the gap. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean to Aborigines? Where do they get the data from? Where does the government interact with people who want to know that if their child died, that child's identity can be protected? And I want to suggest that the protection of that identity has to come from a health service like the Aboriginal Health Service across Australia, that if a person dies, they can have the if you like, the information immediately at a person's death. That what's happened is that white people are telling us a heap of lies about ourselves because in such a racist perspective, people's identity can't be organised where they die, where the parents are on, we're actually in the accidents or at the death of someone. Old people, young people and babies can have an identity like a soldier. If you're in the army, the soldier knows where you are immediately. You're able to speak to your own relatives about someone who's died, or you can have like a bank balance. You know, the plastic money is great to Aboriginal people. Well, why not Medibank? Why don't we save Medibank for Aboriginal people's identity that can be retrieved immediately? And yet governments have been telling us a heap of lies. The fact that, that person is not an Aborigine, too white, right? So if a person is regarded as a near-white, what happens to them? How can that person be regarded as an Aboriginal person? How can you identify that person who's just died? Is it another 50 years before it happens? Yeah. Or can we have a bank balance system that actually is meaningful to either parents or people who are about to die? That if you had a gun and shot it around the place, a policeman would be there to shoot you. And what happens to that bloke? If they're full blood, they don't have to be, or they are asked, are you the right colour?
I'm going to have to keep moving.
Thanks,
on.
Uncle Gordon. I'm just looking at the time. We've got a few more minutes until. Thank you. And all of these discussions will be captured from the team and collated and used for further discussion and analysis. So, what? Have we got any more online questions? Q&A?
Got quite a few.
Yeah. Okay. Let's switch to online for the next few minutes before we go to session 2.
John, did you want to ask your question online, or do you want me to read it out for you? John Willis.
You could just read it out for me if you
sure.
like.
Yeah. The question is, are fair and care principles the right way to go in their current form? To some extent, the FAIR principles represent a value-free approach to data, whereas the CARE principles are all about values. Are they not contradictory? You want to answer that?
Are you talking to me? Are you speaking to me?
I was going to answer that question, or at least have a go.
I just wanted to summarise what our uncle was saying in the previous point, that this is really a motive for us, these conversations around data. So for the non-Indigenous people in the room, this isn't your lives and your communities and your families that is being talked about. So care needs to be taken, because these are literally, this is us that is being talked about, and aspects of our lives, and it is really a motive for people.
Thanks for that question about the appropriateness of FAIR and CARE. That's one of the things that occurs to us at the technical end of people trying to implement assessments of data. So it's a good idea to have data governance principles and so on in place for new data that's collected, but there's an awful lot of data out there about Indigenous people, and we've got to do something with that data. We have to make some kinds of assessments of that data to know whether it's got anything to say about Indigenous people. If it does, is it saying nice things? In what way is it talking about Indigenous people? And ultimately, what can and should Indigenous people do with that data or allow to be done? So that's about that point of roles that I mentioned before. But as to whether those particular systems, FAIR and CARE, are useful and tell us something that helps us with this mission, that's what we're trying to work out. So we know that the FAIR principles are to give a sort of I think it was mentioned, a value-free assessment of the accessibility of this data. So that may tell us something about Indigenous governance of the data, but maybe not. The CARE principles are clearly a bit more in scope here, but we think that there are some other kinds of assessments that might need to be implemented. And a bit later this afternoon, we'll be talking about the kinds of assessments we're considering. We're mostly considering a role-based, an assessment of the roles that have been assigned to people who know about data. So we look at a data set and we say, what roles do people play with regards to that? What roles do Indigenous people play with regards to that? Do we have Indigenous people that even know about this data set existing? If we do they understand it? Can they make sensible decisions about the use of this data, etc.? Is it known that if you want to use this data set, which we think is about Indigenous concerns, that you should actually go to an Indigenous custodian and ask for their opinion of the use of this data? So yes, we do think that there is a bit more work to be done than the CARE principles, and what we're hoping to implement is a fairly systematic way of doing assessments in general. So if you want to assess data sets for their FAIR scores, you can do that. If you want to do CARE scores, you can do that. If you want to do a new IDN-led Australian Indigenous roles governance framework, we can think of a fancy acronym later. If that's what you want to do, we have a mechanism for doing that. So it's about building mechanisms to get the kinds of scores which you tell us would make sense to you. And in the end, it's about characterising data in terms that Indigenous people actually understand.
Thank you. We're at time. I'll let Luke take it.
Excellent.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I'm Jenny Fewster. I'm from the ARDC. I just wanted to follow up on that. I think there is some misconception around FAIR. It has been oversimplified. So the A in FAIR stands for accessible, but the protocol actually talks about allowing authentication and authorisation procedures. So FAIR doesn't mean that everything has to be open slather. So I just wanted to add that point.
Excellent. Thanks, Jenny.